Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Further Faster podcast. My name is Bede. I'm a partner and the Chief Commercial Officer here at Antler. Today, we have a special episode coming to you from London where I am talking to my colleague Christoph Klink, who is a partner in our Continental Europe Fund. Christoph has just completed a study, The Era of Execution, Europe's New Tech Founders in 2025. It's a super interesting study, drawing on data from more than 60,000 founders. And in this conversation, I invited him in to explore what the data reveals, what Christoph is hearing directly from founders across Europe, and what it all means for the next generation of companies on the continent. Christoph, thanks very much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
It's very exciting to be chatting to you, and I think that anybody who has gone through schooling in Europe and potentially even the rest of the world remembers that old phrase, the sick man of Europe. And I think in tech circles, it's probably better thought of as Europe is the sick man. People think that this is a lower capital environment, lower growth, that there's less innovation here, particularly in comparison to the US and China. A lot of top founders. There was a comment recently by Nikolai Storonsky in the press saying that Europe just doesn't have the culture, talking about 996. I think that there's this very pervasive view that Europe is the kind of laggard, but you've just done a lot of research to suggest that that's actually misplaced. Can you talk about it?
Happy to, very happy to. I think I'm glad we're speaking in 2025 and not in 2024, 2023, because we would have had way less evidence for what we're going to talk about. We started this research precisely because we felt that something's changing, right? And we felt that actually after having been the sick person for a long time, now finally there's more than just a bit of light at the end of the tunnel. What we looked at is, I think you've alluded to already, is about 40 founders of the fastest growing software companies ever. We've looked at over 3,000 unicorn founders in the US as well as in Europe to actually understand differences, what's driving that. We've looked at about 100 founders of what we call tech giants, so the top 10 tech companies internationally. And then we've looked at over 1,200 founders in our portfolio in Europe and more than 60,000 founders that are just starting out, that are just kind of at the beginning, at inception of their journey. And what we do feel is that we've actually entered what we call an era of execution. And that era of execution is very, very much characterized by velocity having changed. So overall, when you look at the fastest growing software companies ever, you'll find that in the top 10, 5 of them were founded in just the last 5 years.
Wow.
So something's different, right? And then for me as a European at heart, and in fact a European, 2 of them are European,
Right.
which is not half, but it's a great sign, and it shows velocity has changed and Europe can actually keep pace. Now, secondly to that, we found that there's 14 companies that we would call rocket ships in Europe, which are companies that have been founded since 2020 and have already become unicorns and remained unicorns. Right? And thirdly, I think what we see every day, all day play out right from inception is probably even more encouraging. Because when we look at the portfolio, just the companies been started in the last year and a half, compare them to companies that are 3 years older, what we see is that companies today, quote unquote, get to first revenue 3 times faster and make 5 to 10x the amount of revenue within the first year. So what that is telling us is velocity is overall different. It's actually possible for Europeans building in Europe to be scaling and scaling fast at the same pace that people scale internationally. As a matter of fact, the fastest growing software company ever is European, a company called Lovable. And it's one of those, we believe, already iconic and will be even more iconic software companies of this era of execution.
Tell us, for anybody who's listening to this who is either not working in one of these companies or doesn't have day-to-day experience with them, as a partner who has a number of these companies in your portfolio, what does it actually look like working with them, and how do you think that that's different?
Yeah. So I think the kind of working with founders is something where I consider myself very, very lucky, right? And very often I think about what I do every day, all day, and I think you're quite privileged, right? Because I get to spend pretty much every day with people that are much better at doing what they do than I would be if I tried to do the same thing, right? And I think what has changed there, when you look at the companies overall, there's three main things that we believe have changed. One of them is the widespread use of artificial intelligence. The second one is it feels like the composition of the body of founders in Europe is shifting way more towards technical founders. So people that have been CTOs, have been real builders, have been engineers in their lives. The third one is it appears as if they are focused way more on execution, on growth, on building, and on doing that fast, on out-executing, out-competing their peers. And I think there's a number of interactions that I can actually think of when thinking about that, right? So one of them would be just yesterday evening here in London, sat together with one of our portfolio companies and their founder, Marius from Peak AI. What they do is they do visibility for AI search. So essentially what search engine optimization used to be in the age of traditional search, they're now doing for AI search. So for ChatGPT, Gemini, Perplexity, DeepSeek, etc., helping companies to actually figure out how visible are we, how are we placed, and how can we steer that in our favor, be better discoverable, and actually in the end kind of drive more traffic, more positive traffic towards us. They've launched their product early this year. They're now, and I'm allowed to share this, they're going to announce it in the coming days, they're now over 2 million euros in ARR already. They're growing very, very, very quickly. And when you come to their office, you see one thing, which is really kind of the leading number, which is the daily stat on ARR. And the entire team, the entire company is actually geared towards looking at real ARR, billed, invoiced, paid ARR. They have notifications going to the entire team whenever they close a new deal, whenever they close a new customer. It's quite interesting to see, right? And they are very, very much focused on that real impact, because in the end, the only thing that matters for anyone is, does a customer eventually pay for what we're building? And they focus everything that they do on exactly that, on getting to that outcome. And they started doing that a lot faster. So just as much as kind of the average that I quoted with regards to getting to first revenue 3 times faster, I think companies like Peak AI are actually pushing for earlier commercial validation. They're potentially churning out customers they're not willing to pay early on. It's one of those traps that founders sometimes fall in at inception. They work with customers that are wonderful pilots, test users, co-development partners, whatever it might be. But they never have a large enough pain to actually be willing to put down money in order to actually get rid of that pain. I think founders in that era of execution are a lot more focused on actually doing that. As a matter of fact, when we talk to the portfolio and when we ask them what's the most important thing for you, it used to be access to funding for a long time, particularly in Europe. Now, the 2 most important things are customer acquisition and the speed of execution. That's what they're most, I don't want to say concerned about, but that is top of their mind. That's really what they want to do. And you see that across the board. Also yesterday, sat down with Tom from Voltrac. Voltrac just released and revealed their first product, which is called Thor. Pretty cool.
It's quite nice.
Product.
Love that.
It's actually an amazing product. It's over 3 tons heavy, and it's a fully autonomous electric transport platform for frontline use as well as agriculture. They've built that first product within a time frame of about a year.
Wow.
Which, as we all know, hardware is hard.
Yep.
And that's not only hardware, but there's a lot of software also playing in that hardware. That speed of actually bringing it to the market and then starting to sell it, starting pre-sales already, although they are not yet kind of manufacturing at scale. That would be way too early for that. But they're already pre-selling that product. They're commercializing early on. They're actually looking for that real validation as opposed to building a product, which is lovely, but not getting real customer feedback. I think that's very, very much what we're getting back from the founders that we talk to.
It's really interesting that you say this, because I think what you're talking about is actually two things, right? One is a cultural shift about execution, and the other one describes a set of archetypes of what these new AI first companies look like, right? Where they can build for longer in smaller groups with much more leverage that is created by artificial intelligence. They need to raise less to begin with to get to first customers, and really the measurement that we are using, or the metric to understand whether these companies are performing really well. Historically, you might have looked at headcount growth, and now it really is just that ARR growth. And so it's interesting to hear about Marius just basically having it up on screens in the office. It does speak to a new era of company building. When you talk about this cultural element, right, this and what you describe as a new era of execution in Europe, what are there any kind of guiding principles or any kind of archetype behaviors that you see in that part of the change?
So I think one of them is, I think it's the return of the realization that building a vastly successful scaling company is bloody hard work. Right? So I think in the heydays of 2021, 2022, where we saw that kind of, at least from the outside, it seemed like life would be easy. It was never from the inside, but at least it seemed like it from the outside. I think in particular in Europe, the concern was more around how we can make everything even a bit more lofty, even a bit more cushiony, even a bit more comfortable for people, right? And I think while 996 is not traditionally something that's associated with the Europeans, kind of it's more something that kind of is associated with US work culture, Chinese work culture, I think it is something that's sinking in the breakout successful companies. And it's very unromantic, right? So it's not something that personally, kind of, I guess anybody would be excited about, because yes, it's interesting to be on an island and Europe's beautiful. But at the same time, I think it's the return of that realization, because competition is just also faster, right? So what you see is that AI and the use of AI, particularly in software, is leveling the playing field, is leading to companies building better products at a faster pace with fewer resources. That's great if you're trying to do that. Mm-hmm. It's unfortunately not great because your competitors will do the same thing. And that leads to kind of, you can see successes earlier in these days because companies scale faster, and that motivates competition to also go into similar fields because they can actually see there's real validation for it. There's not just a vision and a great idea. They can actually catch up relatively fast. So you need to keep up that focus. You need to keep up actually the very, very hard work in that. So I think the first one is actually unromantically around putting in actually the effort required in order to get there. I think then the second one is really building AI first. So when we look across the portfolio, we see that 93% of the founders in our portfolio tell us they believe they're scaling way faster because they're leveraging AI. And half of them tell us they're more than 5x faster because they are leveraging AI, right? And they do that across the board, right? So almost everyone, I would say everyone is leveraging it in engineering and product development, particularly in software. Right? Then about 60% of them are leveraging it in automating back office tasks, right? So anything that's not core value creating, that just kind of takes away time, focus, dedication. And about half of them are leveraging it for marketing as well. Right? And I think the key there is to really embrace all the tooling that you have and think about how can you make sure that you only scale the headcount as much as you have to at that point, and actually think about building technology and leveraging all the latest tooling in order to not grow too big too quickly, not crank up the burn too quickly. Because I think the realization for Europeans is there's very little likelihood that the Europeans going to outrace, so raise more money to have more resources available than the US counterparts or international counterparts. But out executing comes for free. Right? And I think that for that, AI is a wonderful force because it's essentially leveling the playing field. It's allowing you to be a lot more resource efficient, and it makes that a competitive weapon.
It's interesting. It's almost like it's eroding what was a traditional comparative advantage, which was access to capital, which, as we know, in Australia, obviously even harder in terms of access to capital than in Europe. And it was always a feature of Australian companies that we invested into, that they had extraordinary capital efficiency just because it was harder to raise money in Australia, particularly in the early stage. And that's likewise true for Europe vis-a-vis the US. It's kind of interesting that you think that the access to this tooling and the ability to hold teams smaller levels that kind of playing field or eliminates some of the advantage that capital once played in this industry, right?
I think what you're saying is spot on, right? It eliminates some of the advantage.
Yeah.
It doesn't reverse it. It doesn't take it away completely. No, right? It levels it somewhat.
Yeah.
It allows you to actually kind of develop a different way of competing and actually make that a weapon. Is it therefore better to have less capital? Probably not.
Yeah.
Right? I think what we...
Certainly not my experience, but yeah.
It's probably true. Although I would say that when you speak to founders who raised a big Series A in 2021, maybe beginning of 2022, they would say that it has misguided some of their spending decisions.
Yeah.
That they had too much capital at a too early point in their journey to actually spend. Right? So I think there are these points where actually being more capital constrained makes you take smarter decisions about how to build, what to build, which kind of capacities to build up at which very point, right? I think that indeed is an advantage that you have to live with, kind of where the environment is giving you that scarcity, and then you can flip it around and actually execute very, very strongly.
You know, it's funny talking about this era of execution because there are kind of two ways to approach this, and I'd love to hear your view on it. Obviously, there's a kind of a new urgency that exists on the continent about building great technology in Europe, right? And so on the one hand, you could argue, well, hey, that's where this kind of culture shift comes from, and I think anybody who is on socials on a daily basis kind of sees a lot of talk about that, but I'm interested to know what your view on it. My feeling is that really this is a cultural response to artificial intelligence, which is simply anybody who is working on a daily basis with the latest tooling and models realizes how much faster it makes them, and realizes that they have no choice other than to move faster and to have this, because it's essentially like a tailwind that everybody is enjoying. And unless you are kind of more successful and can make decisions faster and can execute faster, you will not succeed, because the advantages that AI provides are effectively compounding in this environment. And so I wonder how much what we're describing here, is it this... is it a cultural shift that's occurring across Europe, or is it a human response to a new technology?
To be honest, I think for Europeans, probably both.
Yeah.
Right? So I think for Europeans, when Europeans have always been strong in manufacturing.
Yeah.
Right? Particularly, I'm German, so Germans have been great in manufacturing. Right? Germans have been very afraid of automation in manufacturing a while back, right? Because kind of the Germans thought we'd lose our jobs.
Yeah.
Right? The reality is that didn't really happen, right? So the car industry has automated a lot of its manufacturing, but still it has prospered, right? Now that discussion is back again on kind of, am I losing my job to artificial intelligence? I think for now the answer is right, and I think it's Jensen Huang, NVIDIA, saying that you shouldn't be afraid of AI taking your job. You should be afraid of someone else using AI taking your job, right? I think that for the foreseeable future is exactly the thing that's happening. And I think that's, yes, what people are realizing. And founders are definitely realizing that a lot earlier, because at an early point in their journey, it makes a bigger difference. And they're typically more tech savvy than the average Joe or Jane, right? I think the second element to it as Europeans is that Europeans have, and I don't think we should go into a political discussion now, but Europeans have gotten a lot of wake-up calls geopolitically in the last 3.5 years, right? And we've discussed that many times. And I think for a lot of Europeans that, I don't want to say everybody has heard it now, but a larger and larger share every day of Europeans have heard that we're on our own and we have to be fighting for sovereignty. We have to actually build the tooling that we will use ourselves. We have to build the machines that we want to use ourselves. And I think that is leading to that realization that indeed, if we don't solve it, nobody will solve it for us. And that's true in a lot of sectors. That's sadly true in defense. And that's also not sadly true in technology.
One of the things that I've found really interesting lately, so we have made in Australia 2 investments in the last few weeks into 19-year-olds who came to us having recently dropped out of university, both in computer science, mechatronics degrees, came to us with really sophisticated, well-developed products, already had users in them, or already growing. And I think that what's interesting to me is this speaks of a change that we have seen in our portfolio, where we are increasingly coming across highly technical founders who, again, moving incredibly quickly, already with users, already with a product by the time that we're speaking to them, but still very much in the pre-seed. And it's kind of ironic in this era when so much of what we're talking about is making engineering or computing in various different ways much easier through English or other language prompts, natural language prompts, that in fact the group of people who are really very much rising to the surface are exclusively technical founders. And I'd love to know, I think that is a feature of what you're seeing here, but can you talk a little bit more about what the archetype is here in Europe?
Yeah, very much so. And I think kind of that's true across the board, really, right? So when you start looking at those that are obviously successful, so you start looking at the top 10 tech companies globally, you start looking at the 10 fastest ever growing software companies, you'll find that 96, respectively 94% of the founders are technical in background. I assume that's not a coincidence, right? So there seems to be at least some correlation there between great breakout successful companies that are building fairly technical products these days, and the backgrounds of the founders that are building them, right? And when you then look at what the founders of the European breakout successes, so the unicorns of the last 20 years, have been, what their background has been, then this didn't really mirror that.
Yeah, interesting.
So in the pre-2020 era, when you look at the founders' backgrounds, it's 26% of them are technical. 26 versus 96.
Wow.
So again, not trying to write a PhD about it, but it appears as if those numbers are somewhat different, right?
Yeah.
Let's say that. Right? Now, the companies that have been built, we believe are a function of the founders that are building them, right? And they're also a function of the time. And there's likely kind of a level of sophistication and technology that's trending upwards over time. So in no ecosystem on the world, you're going to start with building a rocket ship first. You're probably going to start with kind of more execution-heavy mobile apps and e-commerce companies 20 years back, right? And that has been a focus of Europe in the 2000s, 2010s, very, very much. It was technology was not the key of that competitiveness. It was the reinvention of a business model. It was kind of a new commercial model behind it. It was very, very strong. Also their execution, by the way, right? But it wasn't technology at the core. E-commerce companies are wonderful, but they are not kind of, what makes them successful is not the technology behind. That's different for a chip company, right? Where technology is very likely what makes them competitive. Now, when you look at the rocket ships, so those founders that have started their company after 2020 and already become unicorn, it's 90% of the founders being technical, which is on par with what we're seeing in the US very much. And I think part of that is more technical founders or more technical young leaders going into, or not even leaders, because those examples are actually quite real that you describe, right? Technical talent going into the career choice of building something. I personally think that kind of Europe has never had too few engineers, but probably too many have chosen to rather work at a corporate as opposed to starting their own business. And I think in the earlier days of venture, and venture in Europe really is rather 25 years old, right? It's not 50 years old, right? It really started rather in the 2000s. Then the first ones to actually move there were rather people that were business-minded with business backgrounds, and that next wave is now technical.
Yeah, interesting. And I wonder how much that speaks to the first part of your categorization of, this is a sense of like Europeans needing to build great companies, and that is stimulating a new tranche of founder to kind of build. The last thing I want to talk about is the way that these founders are building, and we touched on it a little bit earlier. But I think what's great in the report is that you actually articulate a newly identifiable set of traits about the way that these people are building, and I think a lot of people in our audience are listening to this and thinking about how it might affect the way that they're building companies. So perhaps you can talk about what you're calling this kind of new execution mode for founders.
Yeah, very happy to. And I think we're only at the beginning of seeing how that shapes up. And what we've committed ourselves to is actually to contribute to the ecosystem learning fast there. So we're right now in the process, we haven't launched it yet, of establishing a playbook which will become a living document that should inform founders on the early days of their journey on what to actually embrace, what to look for, what skill set. So if anybody of the listeners is actually willing to contribute to that, would actually invite everybody to be doing that. We're going to be working very closely with our portfolio, as well as with founders around it from the ecosystem to actually put that together. But a couple of things we've already indeed discussed, right? So one of them is, I think, taking capital efficiency and embracing it as a competitive weapon, right? It's the opposite of whining about the shortage of capital available. It's actually using that and thinking about how can I actually make smarter allocation decisions than someone who's busy with ramping up because they now have the cash and now have to actually bring up that capacity. And one of the keys to that is actually building AI first, right? And making the wonderful situation that you're in when you're just starting out is you can take any technology decision as if there was nothing, because there is nothing, right? So you have never any kind of decision of having to throw something overboard, and actually kind of facing technical debt. I think on top of that, it's really driving AI usage of tooling through the entire team, but then also through every part of the organization, right? It's a small organization at the beginning, right? But it's thinking about not only how can I use it in engineering, it's thinking about how can I use it to actually get rid of that annoying back office tasks. How can I use it in marketing? How can I actually make sure that I build a lot faster than I would if it was just my human labor going into that? And I think that's, to a certain extent, requires you to be willing to experiment. Because I think for a lot of tools today, we don't know exactly how to use them just yet, and we're figuring that out. So we need to be willing to experiment. We need to be willing to give our teams the tools to actually try out, figure out what sticks, and how to use what, right? Building AI agents for accounting may be a thing that sticks, may not be a thing that sticks, or it may not be a thing that sticks in the way that we're envisioning it right now. I believe it will certainly be something that can be automated. Anything that's clearly logical, repetitive, can likely be automated. So probably we should embrace it, but it may not be at the point in time where we are right now. And I think on top of that, it's really earlier monetization that founders need to actually embrace. And what we see that right at inception with founders that are that are building first product, that are shipping a first product, they're able to now put something in front of a customer way earlier and learn from that and then adapt. If they have to retreat and actually once again kind of put something away, put it on the shelf or put it in the bin, right? So that learning cycle has become a lot shorter. As you are validating the problem that you're solving, as you're validating the product that you're building, and as you're on that path of finding product market fit, all of a sudden you don't have to wait for weeks. And also if you're not technical, then you don't have to wait for CTO to actually help you build the first product. You can actually do that yourself. As a non-technical founder, you probably can't build, at least most that are kind of not willing to go that deep, you can't build production-ready software, but you can build a first product, a first
Extraordinary
MVP.
prototyping.
Exactly, right? And you can put that in front of a customer, you get real feedback and learn from that. So these learning cycles have accelerated quite a bit, and founders succeed if they embrace that. And that's one, just using the tooling to be developing faster, adopting faster. But it's secondly, pushing yourself out of the door earlier and making sure that you're actually in front of the customer, next to the customer, building for them, with them, and pushing for that monetization moment even earlier, because you can now do that. Again, 3 times faster to first revenue than we saw companies 3 years earlier. If you don't do that, competition's going to run away from that. Right? So the last theme, I think, is actually embracing competition and competitiveness and thinking, how can I build, ship faster, the better product, and actually acquire more customers in a shorter amount of time? Because a lot of those categories are new categories, right? So when a company like Peak AI goes out and talks to a customer about visibility in AI search, it's very likely they're not yet using a tool. When Lovable went out and said, hey, should we talk about vibe coding? It's very likely that you're not replacing an existing tool. You're actually selling something new. And you can either be the first one to talk to that very customer, or you can be the second one. But then you're once again in the situation where you have to replace an existing tool. And there, I think the execution in kind of covering new ground is even more important, because there's only one opportunity to talk to every customer for the first time.
It's really interesting. There was one of the comments Marius was making last night. He was saying, we're in an era where there is no shortage of ideas, right? Like there's just this blank canvas. And so, if you're a technical founder, now this is like an era of extraordinary opportunity. On that note, hopefully we're going to be here together again in 2026.
Yeah.
What's going to have changed, do you think?
So I'm pretty sure we're going to be here.
Hope so. Yeah.
Maybe not in London, but I'm pretty confident we're going to be here. I'm an eternal optimist. Otherwise, I don't think we should be doing what we're doing, right? So let's for now assume that we're going to be here. Let's assume that we're going to have a conversation. So what I would hope for is that we're now seeing early signs, right? So the number of those rocket ship companies, it's not in the hundreds, right? It's an early sign that we're seeing, but we're seeing that it's possible, right? And we're seeing a lot of the fundamentals being in place and shifting into the right direction. So number of technical founders starting to build companies have 4x'd in just 3 years. Number of AI engineers starting companies have 14x'd in just 3 years. That flywheel effect that we speak about, startup mafias, that's a compounding effect where one successful company is leading to another one. That's only just beginning, and that's only just starting. So I would hope that we're going to talk about a much larger population of those rocket ship companies. I would hope that we're seeing a lot more break through that sound barrier. And in the valuation of a billion, it's artificial, obviously, but it is a sound barrier that makes it quite visible and makes it easier to distinguish kind of which part of the journey are you actually on. So I would hope to see more there, and I would hope to see continued kind of strengthening of the confidence of Europeans, shaping that narrative that it actually is possible and that we're seeing it, and that people are increasingly pushing for that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being with us, Christoph. My guest today was Christoph Klink. He's just written our new report, The Era of Execution, As a reminder, if you like this conversation, please be sure to subscribe. And if you want to download the report, you can do so at antler.co. Thanks for joining us.